Before there were cities, before there were names, before memory learned how to write itself down, there was only a planet learning how to exist. Imagine a silence so complete it feels unreal. No engines, no voices, no music, no footsteps, no language, just wind moving across rock that had never been touched, oceans breathing without shores, and a sky that did not yet know the color blue. This is not a metaphor. This is Earth before civilization, before history, before humanity, before the idea that the world was made for us. And the first truth you must confront is this: almost everything that has ever happened on Earth happened before humans ever appeared. Time stretches so far back that your mind resists it. Millions of years already feel abstract, billions feel impossible. Yet Earth is over 4.5 billion years old, and civilization occupies only the thinnest scratch at the very end of that timeline. If Earth's history were compressed into a single day, all of recorded human history would take place in the final fraction of a second before midnight. Everything else, the formation of oceans, the rise and fall of entire worlds of life, extinctions so complete they erased reality itself, came before us. At the beginning, there was no life, not even death. Only chaos. The young Earth was violent beyond imagination. It was a glowing sphere of molten rock, constantly bombarded by asteroids and comets. The surface was lava. The sky was poison. There was no oxygen to breathe, no water to drink, no land to stand on. Volcanoes ruled the planet, tearing the surface open again and again, while meteor impacts reset whatever stability tried to form. And yet, even in that violence, something extraordinary was happening. Water began to appear not gently, but catastrophically. Steam poured from volcanoes, rose into the choking atmosphere, and cooled. It rained for thousands, perhaps millions of years without stopping. Rain fell on a world that had no soil, no plants, no rivers. It carved the first oceans directly into naked stone. Lightning cracked constantly across the sky, striking water rich with minerals, energy pouring into chemistry that had never existed before. Planet was not alive, but it was preparing to be. Somewhere in those early oceans, molecules began to organize, not intentionally, not consciously, but inevitably. Carbon bonded with hydrogen. Simple chains formed, then more complex ones. Lipids wrapped around pockets of chemistry, creating crude membranes. Information began to store itself. Replication began, not life as we know it, but something that could copy itself imperfectly. And once replication exists, evolution begins. The first life on Earth did not crawl, it did not breathe, it did not see, it did not think. It was microscopic, fragile, and alien beyond description. These organisms lived in darkness, feeding on chemical energy from vents deep in the ocean. They did not need sunlight. They did not need oxygen. In fact, oxygen would have killed them. For billions of years, Earth belonged entirely to microbes. No trees, no animals, no sound except waves and wind. The continents were barren rock, scoured by radiation from a sun unfiltered by an ozone layer that did not yet exist. The sky glowed orange from methane and haze. The oceans were greenish-black, thick with life invisible to the naked eye. And then one of the greatest revolutions in the history of the planet occurred without intention, without awareness, and without mercy. Some microbes learned to use sunlight. Photosynthesis changed everything. These organisms took in sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide and produced energy, but they also produced something else as waste: oxygen. At first, the oxygen disappeared as quickly as it was made. It reacted with iron in the oceans, rusting the planet from within. Entire seas turned red with oxidized minerals, but eventually the sinks filled. Oxygen began to accumulate in the water, then in the air, and for most life on Earth, this was an apocalypse. Oxygen was poison to the anaerobic organisms that dominated the planet. They died in numbers so vast it qualifies as Earth's first mass extinction. Life nearly wiped itself out by changing the environment too fast for itself to survive. Yet from that catastrophe emerged possibility. Oxygen allowed for far more efficient energy use. Cells grew larger, complexity became viable. Eventually, simple cells merged rather than competed, forming complex cells with internal structures. Cooperation replaced isolation. Eukaryotic life was born, the foundation of everything you recognize as life today. Still, for a very long time, nothing moved. Then suddenly, almost explosively, life began to experiment. The Cambrian period marks a moment when evolution accelerated in ways still not fully understood. In a relatively short geological window, animals developed eyes, mouths, limbs, armor, and nervous systems. Predators appeared for the first time, and prey evolved defenses in response. The oceans became arenas of survival, filled with creatures that seem unreal even now. Armored worms, five-eyed hunters, living shields of flesh and spike. Life learned fear. Eventually, plants crept onto land, assisted by fungi forming underground alliances that still exist today. The land was colonized slowly, painfully. Insects followed, then amphibians, then reptiles. Forests rose where nothing had stood before, massive trees growing in a world with higher oxygen levels than today. Insects grew enormous, dragonflies with wingspans wider than your arms, millipedes longer than a human is tall. But Earth has never been gentle with success. Again and again, life flourished, and again, life was erased. Asteroids struck, volcanoes choked the sky. Climate flipped from furnace to icebox. The greatest extinction of all wiped out more than 90% of species, nearly resetting life entirely. Survival was not a reward for dominance. It was a matter of being adaptable, lucky, or simply small enough to endure catastrophe unnoticed. From one such disaster rose the age of dinosaurs. For over 160 million years, they ruled the planet. Not as monsters, but as ecosystems, herbivores shaping landscapes, predators maintaining balance, feathers evolving long before flight, colors and behaviors as complex as any modern animal. Mammals existed alongside them, but only as shadows, nocturnal, small, hiding, waiting. Then the sky fell. An asteroid struck with energy beyond comprehension. Firestorms swept continents. Dust blocked the sun. Food chains collapsed. The world went quiet again. That silence, mammals inherited the earth. Among them were small primates, tree-dwelling, sharp-eyed, curious. Over millions of years, one lineage began to change. Walking upright freed the hands. Hands shaped tools. Tools changed survival. Diets shifted. Fire was controlled, not discovered, but mastered. Cooking softened food, released more energy, and reshaped jaws, teeth, and brains. Brains grew not because intelligence was destined, but because it was useful. And still, there was no civilization. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived as part of nature, not above it. They moved with seasons, followed animals, read landscapes like maps written in smell and sound. They knew every plant, every track, every signal of danger. They did not own land, they belonged to it. Multiple human species shared the planet at once. They met, they competed, they cooperated, they loved, they interbred. Humanity was never singular. It was a braided river of lineages, most of which ended. Our species nearly ended too. A climatic catastrophe reduced the human population to perhaps only a few thousand individuals. Every human alive today descends from those survivors. Your existence is not guaranteed by progress, it is the result of endurance. Art came before agriculture. Music came before writing. Stories existed before history. Humans painted caves not because they were bored, but because meaning mattered even when survival was uncertain. They buried their dead. They remembered, they imagined, and yet for more than 95% of our existence we did not build cities. Civilization did not emerge because humans suddenly became smart. It emerged because the climate stabilized just enough to allow plants to be controlled, food to be stored, and people to stay in one place. Farming tied humans to land. Land created property. Property created hierarchy. Hierarchy created conflict. Conflict created walls, weapons, laws, and gods who watched over ownership. The moment humans stopped moving, the world began to change, and so did we. At first, settlement did not look like civilization. It looked like patience. A camp that stayed a little longer than usual. A seasonal return to the same riverbank. Seeds dropped near where food was prepared, sprouting where they were not hunted or gathered but watched. There was no plan, no grand decision to invent agriculture. There was only repetition, and repetition slowly became control. Plants that grew near humans thrived. Plants that resisted humans disappeared. Without realizing it, people were selecting the future of life on Earth with every meal they ate. The wild grasses that shattered in the wind were replaced by grains that held onto their seeds. Bitter fruits vanished, sweeter ones survived. Animals that tolerated human presence lived longer. Those that fled were hunted harder. Evolution, which once moved at the pace of climate and catastrophe, began responding directly to human behavior. This was the first time a species reshaped the planet deliberately, without understanding what it was doing. Farming did not arrive as a gift. It arrived as a bargain, and it was a harsh one. Hunter-gatherers had lived diverse lives. They ate hundreds of plant species, moved when resources thinned, and rarely suffered famine in the way later societies would. Early farmers, by contrast, placed their survival in the hands of a few fragile crops. One flood, one drought, one infestation could mean starvation, yet they stayed. They stayed because farming produced surplus, and surplus created possibility. Surplus meant children could survive more easily. Populations grew. Groups became too large to move efficiently. Land once shared became claimed. The earth itself began to be divided into what was ours and what was theirs. And with that division came the first quiet violence. Bones from early farming communities tell a grim story. Skeletons show signs of malnutrition, shorter stature, weaker bones, and damaged teeth. Disease spread more easily when people lived close together, surrounded by waste and domesticated animals. Parasitic infections became common. Life expectancy dropped even as population increased. Civilization was not an improvement to the human body. It was a compromise. But something else was happening beneath the surface, something psychological. For the first time, humans lived surrounded by strangers. In small bands, everyone was known. Trust was personal. Reputation mattered immediately. In settlements, anonymity crept in. Rules had to replace relationships. Authority replaced familiarity. The human brain, evolved for tight-knit groups, was suddenly forced to navigate crowds. This tension never left us. To manage growing numbers, humans turned to structure. Elders became leaders. Leaders became rulers. Decisions once made collectively were enforced from above. Power centralized not because humans loved hierarchy, but because complexity demanded coordination, and coordination demanded control. The first inequalities emerged quietly. Those who controlled grain controlled survival. Those who controlled storage controlled time. Those who controlled time controlled others. Wealth did not begin as gold or coin. It began as food. And where wealth accumulates, conflict follows. Walls rose not to keep nature out, but to keep people out. Weapons evolved not just for hunting, but for dominance. The earliest organized violence appears alongside permanent settlement. War as a recurring institution is a product of civilization, not of humanity itself. Yet alongside this darkness, something astonishing unfolded. Humans began to think in generations. A farmer plants trees he will never sit beneath. A builder raises stones he will never see finished. Time stretched forward, memory stretched backward. The dead were no longer just remembered, they were honored. Ancestors became guides, spirits took shape. Gods emerged not as creators of the world, but as managers of it. Religion did not begin as blind belief. It began as explanation, as comfort, as order imposed on chaos. When floods destroyed crops and disease struck without warning, people searched for meaning. Ritual gave the illusion of control. Prayer gave hope where none could be guaranteed. And slowly, myths became maps not of geography but of morality. Writing came late to this story. For thousands of years, everything important was spoken, sung, repeated. When writing finally appeared, it did not record poetry or philosophy. It recorded debt, grain counts, ownership. Civilization learned to write not to remember stories, but to track obligation. Once words could be fixed, power could be preserved. Laws could outlive rulers, commands could travel without the speaker. Authority detached from the human voice and became abstract, distant, unquestionable. This changed the human mind again. People began to see themselves not just as members of a group, but as subjects of systems. Identity tied itself to occupation, class, and location. A person was no longer simply a human. They were a farmer, a laborer, a priest, a soldier. Roles hardened, mobility narrowed. And yet the old world never fully vanished. Even in the heart of early cities, people dreamed of forests. Stories of golden ages, lost paradises, and simpler times appeared again and again across cultures that never met. This was not coincidence. It was memory echoing through myth, the memory of a time when humans lived differently, when survival was uncertain but freedom was vast. Civilization accelerated everything. Innovation sped up. Tools improved, trade expanded. Knowledge accumulated, but so did fragility. A hunter-gatherer band could survive the collapse of another band. A civilization could collapse entirely. When systems failed, they failed catastrophically. Droughts toppled kingdoms. Soil exhaustion emptied cities. Overconfidence blinded rulers. Civilizations rose believing themselves permanent, only to vanish so completely that later peoples built homes atop their ruins without knowing their names. This cycle repeated endlessly. What civilization gave us was power, but power without wisdom is dangerous. The same intelligence that allowed humans to farm also allowed them to overfarm. The same ingenuity that built cities also built weapons capable of erasing them. Progress did not move in a straight line. It lurched forward, fell back, and surged again, leaving scars on both land and psyche. Through all of this, the human brain remained essentially unchanged. We are still wired for small groups, immediate threats, and direct consequences. Civilization asks us to care about abstractions, nations, economies, futures we will never see. This mismatch creates anxiety, conflict, and longing. Much of modern distress is not weakness, it is ancient biology struggling to cope with unnatural scale. And yet, despite everything, civilization persisted, not because it was perfect, but because it was adaptable. Humans learned, slowly, painfully. They adjusted crops, rotated fields, created alliances, codified ethics. Art evolved from caves to monuments, music echoed in temples. Knowledge was passed not just orally, but institutionally. The experiment continued. What makes this story unsettling is not how far we've come, but how recent it all is. The habits of civilization feel ancient, inevitable, permanent, but they are younger than a blink in evolutionary time. For most of our existence, we lived without borders, without money, without kings, without clocks. And deep inside us, that world still speaks. It speaks when we feel restless in crowded cities, when nature calms us instantly, when stories of survival resonate more deeply than stories of wealth, when cooperation feels more natural than competition, even in systems that reward the opposite. Civilization did not erase our past, it layered over it. Civilization did not merely change how humans lived, it changed how humans thought. Once people began living inside systems larger than any individual could fully comprehend, perception itself shifted. Cause and effect blurred. A failed harvest might be blamed on gods, on leaders, on outsiders, rarely on the invisible accumulation of small choices made over generations. Responsibility became abstract, so did guilt, so did power. In pre-civilized life, consequences were immediate. Hunt poorly and you went hungry. Break trust and you were excluded. Ignore the land and it failed you quickly. Civilization delayed consequences. It allowed mistakes to compound quietly until they erupted catastrophically. This delay gave humans the illusion of control while quietly increasing risk. As settlements grew into cities, cities into states, and states into empires, power drifted farther from those affected by it. Decisions were made by people who would never see their full consequences. This separation changed morality itself. Harm became easier when it was distant. Violence became easier when it was organized. Death became a statistic, and still humans adapted. They adapted by telling stories that justified the system. Kings ruled by divine right. Social hierarchies were framed as natural. Inequality was rebranded as destiny. Myths did not merely explain the world, they stabilized it. They taught people where they belonged and why resistance was dangerous. Yet beneath obedience, resistance always simmered, because the human mind did not evolve to submit blindly. It evolved to question threats, test claims, and protect autonomy. Civilization demanded compliance, biology demanded agency. That tension has never been resolved. Every revolution, every reform, every collapse is an expression of that conflict. Empires rose believing themselves eternal. They built monuments meant to defy time. They carved their names into stone, and time erased them anyway. Civilizations collapse not because humans fail, but because systems exceed the limits of human cognition and ecological balance. Complexity grows until it becomes brittle. Interdependence becomes vulnerability. When one link fails, the chain shatters. History does not move forward smoothly. It pulses, expansion, strain, collapse, reorganization. And each collapse leaves survivors asking the same question: how did we not see this coming? The answer is always the same. They were too close to the system to see beyond it. Civilization trains people to think inside frameworks, to assume continuity, stability, growth, but nature does not guarantee any of these. Nature rewards balance, not ambition, sustainability, not dominance, adaptability, not scale. The tragedy is that humans once understood this intimately. Hunter-gatherer societies were not primitive in awareness. They were sophisticated in ways civilization forgot. They understood migration patterns, seasonal cycles, animal behavior, and ecological limits with precision that modern humans struggle to relearn. They did not extract endlessly because endless extraction was impossible. Their survival depended on restraint. Civilization severed that feedback loop. Once food came from fields rather than forests, people stopped seeing themselves as part of ecosystems and began seeing ecosystems as resources. Trees became timber, rivers became irrigation, animals became units of production. The living world turned into inventory. This shift altered not just behavior but identity. Humans stopped asking, how do we belong, and started asking, how do we control? Control is seductive. It feels like safety, but it is fragile. Every layer of control requires energy to maintain. Irrigation canals must be cleared, walls must be guarded, laws must be enforced, armies must be fed. The more control a civilization exerts, the more energy it consumes, and the more catastrophic failure becomes when that energy flow is disrupted. This is why collapse often feels sudden. It is not sudden. It is the moment the system can no longer pay the cost of its own complexity. Throughout history, people living inside civilizations rarely recognized collapse while it was happening. They experienced it as confusion, corruption, moral decay. They blamed individuals, not structures. By the time collapse was undeniable, it was irreversible. Yet collapse is not the end of humanity. It is the end of a particular way of organizing humans. After collapse, people return temporarily to older patterns, smaller groups, local knowledge, direct dependence on land. Cooperation over hierarchy. These are not regressions, they are rebalancing acts. What is unsettling is how familiar this pattern feels now. Modern civilization is more complex, more powerful, and more interconnected than any before it. It has achieved wonders unimaginable to our ancestors, but it also carries the same vulnerabilities amplified. Global supply chains mean distant failures affect everyone. Environmental degradation accumulates beyond local perception. Decisions made by a few ripple across billions of lives, and still the human brain remains ancient. We crave meaning, we crave belonging, we crave fairness. Civilization offers efficiency instead, speed instead of wisdom, abundance without context. It tells us we are progressing even as anxiety, loneliness, and ecological instability rise. This does not mean civilization is a mistake. It means it is unfinished. Understanding the world before civilization is not nostalgia. It is not a call to abandon technology or return to caves. It is a reminder of constraints, biological, psychological, ecological, that no system can ignore forever. Our ancestors survived ice ages, predators, famine, and near extinction without cities, without writing, without machines. They did so by aligning themselves with reality rather than attempting to dominate it. Civilization succeeded by breaking that alignment temporarily. Its future depends on whether it can restore it consciously. We stand now at a crossroads similar to those faced by countless past societies, but on a scale never before encountered. The decisions made in this era will not simply shape one civilization. They will shape the conditions under which civilization itself can continue. The past before civilization is not dead. It lives in our instincts, our emotions, our restlessness, our resilience. It whispers warnings encoded in bone, myth, and memory. To ignore it is to repeat cycles blindly. To listen to it is to gain perspective, humbling, unsettling, and necessary. Civilization's greatest illusion is permanence. Once humans learned to shape stone into monuments, they began to believe that what they built could outlast time itself. Walls felt eternal, cities felt inevitable, empires felt destined. Yet the deeper you look into the past, the clearer one truth becomes. Nothing humans build is meant to last forever, not because we are flawed, but because we are alive. Life is movement. Civilization is an attempt to pause that movement. When societies stabilize, they begin to mistake stability for safety. Rules harden, traditions fossilize, power concentrates. Innovation slows where it threatens authority and accelerates where it strengthens control. Over time, the system becomes less about meeting human needs and more about preserving itself. This is the quiet moment before every collapse. The people living inside such systems rarely sense danger in the way their ancestors once did. There is food in markets, water in pipes, order in streets. But the signals that once warned humans of imbalance, declining herds, dying forests, exhausted soil, are hidden behind layers of abstraction. A famine is no longer a failed ecosystem, it is a price increase. A drought is no longer a warning, it is a statistic. Distance dulls urgency. Civilization replaces intuition with administration. And administration, no matter how sophisticated, cannot replace awareness. As societies grow, they demand specialization. No one person understands the whole system anymore. Knowledge fragments, responsibility disperses. When things go wrong, blame circulates endlessly without landing anywhere meaningful. The system persists not because it is healthy, but because no one knows how to stop it without collapsing everything at once. This is the paradox of complexity. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the harder it is to change. Our ancestors did not face this problem. Their systems were simple enough to abandon when they failed. If a region became unlivable, they moved. If resources declined, they adapted. Flexibility was survival. Rigidity was death. Civilization inverted this logic. Once humans invested in cities, fields, and infrastructure, movement became loss. Adaptation became disruption. Change became threat. Survival shifted from responding to reality to defending investment. This is why civilizations so often collapse, resisting change rather than embracing it. Throughout history, people warned of imbalance. Farmers noticed soil exhaustion. Fishers noticed declining catches. Elders noticed moral decay. Thinkers warned of excess. But civilizations rarely collapse because of ignorance. They collapse because of inertia. Too many people depend on the system as it is. Too much identity is bound to existing structures. Too much fear surrounds the unknown alternative. And so collapse arrives not as a surprise, but as a reckoning deferred too long. Yet even in collapse, humanity does not vanish. What emerges after the fall of complex systems is not chaos, but reorganization. Smaller communities form, old skills regain value, local knowledge reasserts itself. Cooperation becomes necessary again, not as ideology, but as survival. This pattern reveals something profound. Civilization is optional, but humanity is resilient. The danger lies not in losing systems, but in forgetting who we are without them. Modern humans often imagine pre-civilized life as brutal, short, and meaningless. This is a comforting myth. It allows civilization to feel like salvation rather than trade-off. In truth, pre-civilized humans experienced hardship, but they also experienced autonomy, connection, and direct meaning in ways modern societies struggle to recreate artificially. Meaning was not something to be found, it was something lived. Civilization outsourced meaning to institutions, religion, nation, career, progress. When those institutions falter, people feel lost not because meaning is gone, but because they were taught to look for it externally. This creates a spiritual fragility unique to civilization. In moments of crisis, people do not merely lose resources, they lose identity. Who are you without your role, without your system, without your narrative of progress? Our ancestors knew the answer instinctively. They were members of living worlds, not functions of structures. The challenge of the present age is not technological, it is existential. We have built systems powerful enough to reshape the planet, but not wise enough to restrain themselves automatically. We possess knowledge unmatched in history, yet struggle to apply it collectively. We can predict collapse models mathematically while remaining emotionally incapable of changing course. This is not stupidity. It is biology. The human brain evolved to respond to immediate threats, not slow-moving catastrophes. It evolved to prioritize social belonging over abstract truth. It evolved to conserve energy, not optimize sustainability across generations. Civilization asks the brain to do what it was never designed to do, care deeply about distant futures, invisible systems, and collective outcomes beyond personal experience. This mismatch explains much of modern frustration, denial, and polarization. People are not broken, they are overwhelmed, and yet there is something different about this moment in history. For the first time, humanity possesses awareness of its own trajectory. We can study past collapses, we can map ecological limits, we can understand our evolutionary constraints, we can see the patterns not as myths but as data. This gives us a choice no previous civilization fully possessed. Awareness does not guarantee wisdom, but it creates the possibility of it. The question is whether civilization can evolve culturally faster than it evolved technologically. Whether social systems can catch up to the power they wield, whether humans can design structures that align with their ancient nature rather than fight it. This would require a radical shift, not backward but inward. It would require redefining success not as endless growth but as balance, redefining progress not as speed but as resilience, redefining intelligence not as domination but as harmony with limits. These ideas are not new. They echo ancient philosophies, indigenous knowledge, and forgotten practices from before civilization hardened into dogma. What is new is the scale at which they must now operate. We are no longer a species among many. We are a planetary force, and planetary forces must learn restraint or face correction. The past before civilization teaches us this without words. It shows us that life persists not through conquest but through adaptation. That dominance invites collapse. That survival favors those who listen more than they control. Whether modern civilization can internalize this lesson remains uncertain. But one truth is unavoidable. The future will not judge us by what we built, but by whether life could continue because of or despite us. The slope is gentle at first, almost invisible. Civilizations do not fall the way stories suggest. There is no single day when everything breaks, no clear moment when people wake up and say, "This is collapse." Instead, there is normalization. Each small loss is absorbed, justified, explained away. What once would have shocked becomes routine. What once would have provoked action becomes background noise. This is how decline hides itself from those living inside it. In earlier ages, collapse was often localized. A city failed, a region emptied, survivors moved elsewhere. The world continued. Today, the scale is different. Systems interlock globally. Energy, food, information, finance, and belief move across the planet in continuous circulation. When one part strains, others compensate temporarily. This buffering creates the illusion of resilience while quietly increasing systemic stress. The danger is not fragility alone, it is delayed fragility. Humans are remarkably good at adapting to worsening conditions. This is one of our greatest strengths and one of our greatest vulnerabilities. We adjust expectations downward. We redefine normal. We tolerate instability longer than we should because adaptation feels like survival. But adaptation without correction becomes endurance of harm. Pre-civilized humans adapted by changing behavior. Civilized humans often adapt by changing perception. When the land no longer provides, we import. When water becomes scarce, we ration. When ecosystems collapse, we substitute. Each solution distances us further from the source of the problem. Each layer of mediation reduces urgency. Eventually, the system becomes so abstract that reality can no longer speak clearly to those making decisions. This is when collapse becomes likely, not inevitable, but probable. And yet something extraordinary is happening beneath the surface of modern life, something that mirrors a much older rhythm. people are remembering, not consciously at first, not as history lessons or ideological movements, but as impulses, a desire for smaller communities. A longing for nature, a suspicion of endless growth, a return to craft, to ritual, to local knowledge. These are not trends, they are echoes. The human nervous system remembers a way of living that civilization never erased, only buried. This does not mean the past was perfect, it means it was aligned. Alignment is the missing word in modern discussions of progress. Technology has advanced faster than ethics. Power has expanded faster than empathy. Systems have grown larger than the minds meant to guide them. Pre-civilized life was limited, but its limits were visible. Modern life is vast, but its limits are hidden, and so they are often crossed unintentionally. The irony is profound. The more intelligent humanity becomes, the more essential humility becomes. Our ancestors understood this intuitively. They knew the land could not be forced indefinitely. They knew animals must be spared to return. They knew seasons could not be commanded. Their myths were not fantasies, they were safeguards encoded as stories. Taboos protected resources. Rituals regulated behavior. Belief systems acted as ecological memory. Civilization stripped these safeguards away in the name of efficiency. Efficiency is seductive because it feels rational, but nature is not efficient. It is redundant, diverse, wasteful by human standards, and that waste is resilience. Multiple species fill similar roles so that when one fails, others persist. Overlap is not inefficiency, it is insurance. Civilization optimized for output, not resilience. This is why ancient systems that appear inefficient often lasted longer than those that maximized production. They left room for error. Civilization, by contrast, tightens margins until there is no buffer left. When buffers disappear, shock becomes disaster. Yet history also teaches us something hopeful. Humans are capable of learning, but rarely without pressure. Crisis strips illusion. It clarifies priorities. It reveals which systems serve life and which merely serve themselves. The danger of the present era is not collapse itself, but collapse without understanding. If systems fail and people blame only individuals or groups or ideologies, the deeper lesson is lost. The cycle repeats. A new system rises built on the same assumptions, destined for the same fate. Breaking the cycle requires a shift not in technology, but in worldview. It requires remembering that civilization is a tool, not an identity. That systems exist to serve human life, not define it. That progress must be measured not only by growth, but by well-being, ecological, psychological, and social. This is not a call to abandon civilization. It is a call to civilize civilization, to design systems that respect human limits instead of exploiting them, to create economies that value regeneration over extraction, to build cultures that reward cooperation more than dominance, to accept that not everything that can be done should be done. These ideas are often dismissed as unrealistic, but what is truly unrealistic is believing that a species can exceed planetary limits indefinitely without consequence. Nature does not punish, it corrects, and correction does not care about intention. The pre-civilized world understood this because it lived inside it. The civilized world must relearn it consciously or relearn it painfully. What gives this moment its gravity is that for the first time humanity can see the whole picture. Satellites show planetary change in real time. Science traces cause and effect across centuries. History reveals repeating patterns. Psychology explains our blind spots. Biology explains our constraints. Ignorance is no longer the obstacle. The obstacle is courage. Courage to question inherited systems. Courage to accept limits. Courage to slow down. Courage to value life over abstraction. courage to admit that some ancient ways of thinking were not primitive but wise. The world before civilization was not paradise. It was harsh, uncertain, and vulnerable, but it was honest. Consequences were visible. Dependency was mutual. Survival required respect for land, for animals, for each other. Civilization gave us power. The question now is whether we can give ourselves restraint. Humanity's oldest instincts were never meant to govern empires. They evolved in small groups under open skies where survival depended on reading faces, sharing food, and sensing danger in the wind. Cooperation was not moral, it was practical. Empathy was not idealistic, it was necessary. Storytelling was not entertainment, it was memory encoded for survival. Civilization took these instincts and stretched them far beyond their original scale. At first, they held. Kinship became tribe, tribe became people, people became nation. Stories grew larger, gods more powerful, symbols more abstract. Cooperation extended beyond faces to flags. Empathy was redirected toward imagined communities. Belonging became ideological, and slowly something essential thinned. The human nervous system cannot truly feel millions, it can only feel a few. When systems demand loyalty to abstractions larger than our emotional capacity, people compensate by narrowing empathy. Outsiders become statistics, enemies become symbols, suffering becomes distant. This is not cruelty, it is limitation. Civilization often mistakes this limitation for moral failure when it is simply biological constraint. Humans did not evolve to care about everyone equally. They evolved to care deeply about a few. The tragedy of civilization is not that humans are selfish, but that systems demand a scale of concern the brain cannot naturally sustain. To cope, societies invented moral frameworks, laws, religions, and philosophies. These were attempts to extend empathy artificially. Sometimes they worked, often they failed, but the effort itself reveals something important. Humanity has always tried to be better than its instincts, even when it did not fully understand them. This tension between what we are and what we aspire to be runs through all of history. In pre-civilized life, morality was situational and relational. Right and wrong were negotiated through consequence and survival. Civilization attempted to universalize morality, to codify it, to make it stable across time and space. This was necessary for large societies, but it also froze ethics in place while conditions changed. Rules written for one era persisted into another. Sacred laws outlived the environments that shaped them. Morality became less responsive, more rigid, and rigidity once again invited collapse. Yet even as systems hardened, the ancient instincts never vanished. They resurfaced in moments of crisis. When disaster struck, people reverted not to ideology but to each other. Neighbors helped neighbors, strangers shared resources. Cooperation emerged spontaneously, not because of law, but because it felt right. This pattern repeats everywhere across cultures and centuries. Strip away the system and humanity reappears. This is one of the most hopeful and unsettling truths of our species. Hopeful because it means empathy is not taught, it is remembered. Unsettling because it often takes breakdown to reveal it. The challenge of the present era is to awaken these instincts without collapse, to design systems that amplify cooperation rather than suppress it, to align incentives with long-term well-being instead of short-term gain, to create cultures where caring is not a weakness and restraint is not failure. This requires redefining strength. For most of civilization, strength has meant expansion, dominance, accumulation, bigger cities, larger armies, faster growth, more consumption. These metrics made sense in a world of competition between groups, but in a fully interconnected planet, Dominance destabilizes the very system that enables it. The strongest system is no longer the one that grows fastest, but the one that endures longest. Endurance requires balance. Balance requires limits. Limits require wisdom. Wisdom is not intelligence. Intelligence solves problems. Wisdom chooses which problems should be solved at all. Our ancestors practiced this unconsciously. They knew some paths led to depletion. Some hunts were forbidden, some lands were sacred, not because they were mystical, but because restraint was survival. Modern civilization must relearn restraint consciously. This is difficult because restraint feels like loss, it feels like regression, it feels like admitting error. Yet every living system that persists does so by regulating itself. Cells that grow without restraint become cancer. Ecosystems that lose balance collapse. Civilizations are no different. The difference is that civilizations can reflect on themselves. Reflection is humanity's rarest gift. We can study the past before civilization not as nostalgia, but as instruction. We can see which patterns endured and which destroyed themselves. We can identify the assumptions that led to collapse and choose differently, not automatically, but deliberately. This is what makes this moment unprecedented. Never before has a civilization known so much about its own fragility. Never before has it possessed such power alongside such awareness. Never before has the gap between capacity and wisdom been so visible. The outcome is not predetermined. Pessimism feels justified because history is heavy with failure. Optimism feels naive because power is uneven and incentives are misaligned. But both miss something essential. Humanity has always adapted when adaptation became unavoidable. The question is not whether we will change, but how much damage will occur before we do. The world before civilization teaches patience. It reminds us that life does not rush, that ecosystems recover slowly, that shortcuts often lead to dead ends, that survival favors those who listen longer than they act. Modern civilization teaches speed, it rewards reaction, it punishes pause, it equates urgency with importance. Reconciling these tempos may be the defining task of our future. If we fail, civilization will not be the first to collapse. It will simply be the largest. Life will continue as it always has. New equilibria will form. Humanity may persist in altered forms, smaller, humbler, closer to the land again. If we succeed, something entirely new emerges, not a return to the past, but a synthesis. A civilization that remembers where it came from, that honors ancient instincts while wielding modern tools, that understands power as responsibility rather than entitlement. Such a civilization would not see itself as separate from nature, but as a conscious part of it. Not rulers of the planet, but participants in its continuity. This is not utopian, it is realistic because it aligns with how life actually works. The world before civilization was not silent, it was speaking constantly to those who knew how to listen. Wind carried information, tracks told stories, seasons taught patience, death taught respect. We have not lost the ability to listen, we have buried it under noise. Long before humans built walls around cities, they built walls inside the mind. The psyche was the first landscape we learned to navigate and the first we tried to control. In the world before civilization, fear had a clear shape, a predator in the dark, a storm on the horizon, hunger tightening the body. Fear arrived with a cause, demanded a response, and then released its grip. Once the danger passed, the nervous system could rest. Civilization changed the nature of fear. When threats became abstract, taxes, debts, laws, enemies beyond the horizon, fear lost its object. It lingered, it became chronic. The mind, evolved to handle short bursts of danger, was forced to carry unease indefinitely. Anxiety replaced alertness, worry replaced action. This was not weakness, it was overload. The human psyche evolved to live in reality, not in constant anticipation of imagined futures. Civilization pulled the mind forward relentlessly, asking it to plan, predict, optimize, and compete. Memory stretched backward through recorded history. Imagination stretched forward through promises and threats. The present moment, the only place humans can truly live, shrank, and into that shrinking space meaning struggled to survive. Before civilization, meaning was immediate. Survival mattered because life mattered. Bonds mattered because they were visible. The universe did not need to be explained to feel significant. Existence itself was enough. Civilization disrupted this simplicity. Once survival could be delayed through storage and systems, life lost its urgency. Once identity became tied to roles rather than relationships, belonging became conditional. Once value was measured numerically, grain, land, money, worth became externalized. Humans began to ask questions their ancestors rarely needed to ask. Who am I really? What is my purpose? Why does this feel empty even when I have enough? These questions were not philosophical luxuries, they were symptoms. The psyche was responding to disconnection. To manage this disconnection, civilizations created narratives, grand stories that promised meaning beyond immediate experience. Eternal afterlives, historical destinies, moral absolutes, progress arcs that turned suffering into necessary sacrifice. These narratives were not lies, they were psychological technologies. They helped humans endure systems that no longer aligned with instinct. They gave coherence to lives fragmented by hierarchy and routine. They offered belonging to those displaced from land, tribe, and kin. But every psychological tool has side effects. When meaning is outsourced to systems, institutions gain power over identity. When purpose is defined externally, obedience becomes virtue. When suffering is framed as necessary, injustice becomes tolerable. The psyche adapted again, not by becoming healthier, but by becoming compartmentalized. People learned to separate who they were from what they did. To suppress instincts that conflicted with survival inside systems, to ignore signals of exhaustion, grief, and moral injury. Civilization rewarded those who could silence themselves most effectively. This created productivity, but at a cost. Trauma changed shape. In pre-civilized life, trauma often came from acute events, loss, violence, catastrophe. Pain was shared, grief was communal. Healing happened through ritual, storytelling, and time. Trauma was heavy, but it was processed together. Civilization introduced chronic trauma, long hours of meaningless labor, powerlessness under distant authority, social isolation within crowds, constant comparison, insecurity without clear cause. These experiences do not leave visible scars, but they reshape the nervous system slowly, quietly. The body remembers what the mind rationalizes. This is why modern humans often feel tired without being physically exhausted, anxious without immediate danger, lonely while surrounded by people. These are not personal failures, they are signals of mismatch between ancient psychology and modern conditions, and yet even here the past offers guidance. Pre-civilized humans understood rhythm. Activity followed rest, effort followed celebration, loss followed ritual. Life moved in cycles that allowed the psyche to reset. Civilization disrupted these cycles in the name of efficiency. Efficiency does not care about rhythm, it cares about output. When rhythm disappears, burnout emerges. The psyche rebels not through logic but through symptoms. Depression, anxiety, addiction, aggression. These are not malfunctions, they are messages. They signal that something fundamental is out of alignment. Civilization often treats these signals as individual pathology rather than systemic warning. It medicates, disciplines, and diagnoses instead of listening. but the psyche cannot be silenced forever. Throughout history, moments of profound cultural change were preceded by psychological strain. People sensed that existing narratives no longer made sense. Belief systems fractured, art grew darker or more radical. Mystical movements emerged. People searched inward when outward structures failed to satisfy. These moments were not decadence, they were transition. We may be living in such a moment now. The stories that sustained industrial civilization, endless growth, perpetual progress, domination of nature, are losing credibility. They no longer match lived experience. The psyche feels the contradiction even when the intellect resists acknowledging it. This creates cognitive dissonance at scale. Some respond by clinging harder to old narratives, others reject all narratives entirely. Polarization increases not because people disagree about facts, but because they disagree about meaning. The psyche craves coherence. When coherence collapses, extremism flourishes. The world before civilization reminds us that coherence does not require grand narratives. It requires alignment. When daily life reflects values, meaning emerges naturally. When actions match instincts, the psyche relaxes. The future of civilization may depend less on new ideologies and more on restoring this alignment, not by abandoning complexity, but by humanizing it. Systems can be redesigned to respect psychological limits. Work can be reconnected to visible purpose. Communities can be structured to foster belonging rather than competition. Time can be reclaimed from constant urgency. These are not technical problems, they are cultural choices. The deepest lesson of the pre-civilized world is this: humans thrive when they feel part of something alive, immediate, and reciprocal. The psyche does not need perfection, it needs honesty, it needs connection, it needs to know that effort matters and that care is returned. Civilization often promises these things indirectly. The past provided them directly. As we move forward, the task is not to romanticize the past, but to integrate its wisdom consciously. To remember that beneath every system is a human nervous system shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of intimacy with reality. Ignore that and no structure will endure. Honor it and even fragile systems can heal. Before civilization learned how to write, humanity learned how to remember. Memory came first, not as records, not as dates or names, but as living experience passed from one mind to another. The world before civilization survived not because it stored information externally, but because it carried knowledge internally, embedded in story, song, ritual, and habit. Memory was not separate from life. It was life unfolding continuously. To forget was to risk death. A migration route forgotten meant starvation. A seasonal pattern ignored meant exposure. A dangerous animal misremembered meant loss. Memory was not nostalgia. It was survival encoded in culture. And because survival depended on it, memory was shared collectively, reinforced constantly, and renewed with every generation. Civilization transformed memory, and in doing so, changed how humans understood themselves. When writing emerged, memory externalized itself. Knowledge moved from the body into objects. Clay tablets, carvings, scrolls, these were revolutionary not because they preserved information, but because they freed individuals from the burden of remembering everything themselves. At first, this felt like progress, and in many ways it was, but something subtle was lost. When memory lives outside the body, it no longer shapes instinct as deeply. When stories are written, they no longer need to be retold. When knowledge is stored externally, it stops evolving through repetition. It becomes fixed. Static, authoritative, civilization traded living memory for permanent record. This allowed knowledge to accumulate, but it also allowed wisdom to stagnate. In pre-civilized societies, memory adapted with context. Stories changed slightly with each telling, responding to new environments, new threats, new lessons. This flexibility was not corruption, it was intelligence. It allowed culture to remain aligned with reality. Written memory resists change. It preserves past solutions even when conditions shift. What once worked becomes sacred. Questioning it becomes heresy. This is how tradition hardens into dogma. As civilizations grew, collective memory fractured. Elites controlled records. History became selective. Victories were remembered, failures erased. Narratives served power. Memory stopped being communal and became political. Those without access to written memory were excluded from history itself. Yet beneath official records, another memory persisted. Oral traditions survived alongside writing. Songs, myths, proverbs, rituals, these carried emotional truth even when factual accuracy blurred. They preserved values rather than events. They remembered how it felt to live in balance, to face loss, to endure change. This emotional memory is older than language itself. It lives in the nervous system, in instinctive reactions, in what feels safe or dangerous, in the comfort of firelight, in the unease of confinement, in the calm that arrives when surrounded by trees or water. Modern humans often mistake these responses for preference. They are not, they are memory without words. The body remembers the world before civilization. This is why certain places feel grounding, why silence can feel nourishing, why shared meals matter more than their nutritional content, why stories move us even when we know they are fictional. They resonate with ancient memory structures shaped long before writing. Civilization often dismisses this as irrational, but irrational does not mean irrelevant. The danger arises when civilizations forget how much they rely on what they no longer acknowledge. As memory externalized, responsibility did too. If knowledge exists in books, institutions, and experts, individuals feel less accountable for understanding the world themselves. Trust replaces awareness. Delegation replaces participation. This is efficient but fragile. When systems fail, stored memory may remain intact, but living memory is gone. People know what was written, but not how to live it. They know the rule, but not the reason. The record survives, the wisdom does not. History is filled with such moments. Civilizations collapse, leaving libraries behind, but no one who knows how to apply what they contain. The knowledge is preserved, but the culture that gave it meaning is lost. This reveals a hard truth. Information is not enough to sustain a society. What sustains a society is shared memory that guides behavior intuitively, even under stress. The world before civilization excelled at this. Its memory systems were embodied. Children learned by watching, doing, participating. Knowledge was not abstract, it was contextual. You did not learn about hunting, you hunted. You did not study ecology, you lived inside it. Civilization replaced this with instruction. Education became symbolic rather than experiential. Learning moved indoors. Knowledge detached from environment. The mind learned faster than the body could integrate. This accelerated innovation, but it also widened the gap between knowing and doing. Modern humans know about climate change. Ancient humans felt climate change. They noticed shifts immediately because their survival depended on it. We notice it statistically, distantly, often too late to respond instinctively. This is not moral failure, it is structural disconnection. Reconnecting does not require abandoning science or technology. It requires re-embodying memory. It requires restoring feedback loops between action and consequence, between decision and experience, between culture and environment. Some societies are already attempting this, consciously or unconsciously. reviving indigenous practices, reconnecting education to land, valuing local knowledge, emphasizing systems thinking over isolated facts. These efforts are not regressions, they are recoveries. They represent civilization remembering something it once knew instinctively. That memory must live in people, not just in records. The deepest danger of forgetting the pre-civilized world is not ignorance of the past, it is amnesia about what makes us human. Humans are not machines that process information efficiently. We are organisms that learn through experience, story, emotion, and relationship. When systems ignore this, they become inhuman, not because they are cruel, but because they are incomplete. The future of civilization may depend on whether we can design memory systems that are both durable and alive, records that guide without rigidifying, stories that adapt without erasing truth, knowledge that accumulates without disconnecting from lived reality. This is a cultural challenge, not a technical one. The past before civilization did not have answers to modern problems, but it had frameworks for remembering what mattered. It remembered limits. It remembered interdependence. It remembered that survival is collective. These memories are not gone, they are dormant. They surface in moments of crisis, when people instinctively turn toward cooperation, toward land, toward meaning beyond consumption. They surface in art, in ritual, in the quiet discomfort many feel with lives that appear successful but feel hollow. Memory is calling not backward but inward. Every generation inherits a world shaped by decisions it did not make. Rivers redirected long before they were born, forests cleared in the names of people long forgotten, laws written by hands now dust, stories repeated so often they feel timeless even when they are young. No one arrives at the beginning. We all arrive in the middle, carrying the consequences forward, whether we understand them or not. This is what it means to be an ancestor in waiting. The world before civilization understood ancestry not as legacy, but as responsibility. To hunt recklessly was to starve children not yet born. To poison water was to curse descendants you would never meet. Time was not segmented into now and later. It was continuous. The future lived inside the present. Civilization fragmented that continuity. Once systems promised security beyond individual lifetimes, responsibility thinned. The future became abstract. Someone else would handle it. Someone else would pay. This diffusion of responsibility is not moral decay, it is structural distance. When consequences are delayed, accountability fades, and yet the future never forgets. It arrives regardless, inheriting whatever remains. The question is not whether we will be ancestors. We already are. The only question is what kind. Every road built, every species lost, every system reinforced becomes part of the inheritance. Our descendants will not judge our intentions. They will live with our outcomes. They will breathe what remains of our air, drink what remains of our water, and build meaning atop whatever ruins or foundations we leave behind. The people of the distant past did not imagine us, but we imagine them constantly. We reconstruct their lives, speculate about their choices, admire their resilience, critique their limits. We ask how they lived without knowing what we know now. One day others will do the same to us. They will wonder how a species so intelligent could be so slow to act, or how a civilization so powerful found the wisdom to change. They will tell stories either of warning or of gratitude. Those stories will become their myths. The world before civilization teaches that myths are not lies, they are compressed memory. They encode lessons too complex to transmit as data alone. They shape behavior long after details fade. We are writing myths now not intentionally but inevitably. If our story becomes one of collapse, it will warn future societies about hubris. If it becomes one of transformation, it will guide them toward balance. Either way, the narrative will outlive us. This realization can feel heavy, but it can also feel clarifying, because being an ancestor is not about perfection. It is about direction. Our ancestors made mistakes we can now see clearly, but they also gave us gifts: language, cooperation, imagination, resilience. They survived long enough for us to exist. That alone matters. We are not required to solve everything. We are required to turn toward life. Turning toward life does not mean rejecting civilization. It means aligning it with what sustains living systems. It means choosing durability over speed, sufficiency over excess, connection over isolation. These choices are not dramatic, they are cumulative. Civilization often searches for salvation in grand solutions, revolutions, technologies, singular breakthroughs. But the past reveals a quieter truth. Lasting change emerges from countless small decisions reinforced over time. How food is grown, how children are taught, how work is valued, how rest is respected, how disagreement is handled. A land is treated, how success is defined. These are ancestral choices. They determine whether the future inherits soil or dust, trust or fear, possibility or constraint. The world before civilization reminds us that humans did not survive because they were dominant. They survived because they were attentive. They noticed change early. They adjusted behavior. They respected thresholds they could not cross safely. Civilization blurred thresholds. It made limits negotiable, but limits do not negotiate. The path forward is not a return to simplicity, but a return to awareness. Awareness that systems are extensions of human values. Awareness that values shape outcomes. Awareness that every convenience has a cost paid somewhere by someone at some time. When awareness spreads, behavior shifts, not all at once, but steadily. This is how civilizations actually change, not through collapse alone, but through accumulation of insight. We often underestimate how much transformation is already underway because it does not match dramatic narratives. But beneath headlines and conflict, millions of people are renegotiating their relationship with work, consumption, land, and meaning. They are questioning inherited assumptions. They are searching for coherence between what they know and how they live. This search is ancient. It is the same impulse that guided early humans to sit around fires and ask what mattered. The same impulse that shaped rituals, stories, and taboos. The same impulse that built the first settlements and later questioned them. The difference now is scale. For the first time, humanity's internal conversation has planetary consequences. Our private values aggregate into global outcomes. There is no outside anymore, no untouched frontier to absorb error. This makes the present era uniquely demanding, but also uniquely meaningful. To live at a moment when choices echo so far forward is a rare burden, but it is also a rare opportunity. The world before civilization survived without knowing the future. We face the future knowing more than any generation before us. Knowledge does not guarantee wisdom, but it invites it. Wisdom begins with humility. Humility to admit that progress has costs. Humility to learn from cultures once dismissed as primitive. Humility to accept that being human means living within limits, not conquering them. From humility grows care, from care grows restraint, from restraint grows continuity. This is how ancestors are made, not through monuments, but through maintenance of life. The most meaningful legacy is not what is built, but what is preserved. Preserved ecosystems, preserved trust, preserved possibility. Future generations will not thank us for convenience, they will thank us for restraint. They will not praise our speed, they will praise our foresight. and if they struggle, as all humans do, they will still inherit a world that can support struggle without breaking. That is enough. The world before civilization whispers this final lesson. Survival is not about winning history. It is about staying in relationship with life. Awareness changes everything, but it does not arrive gently. When a species becomes aware of itself, it does not immediately become wise. It becomes conflicted. Torn between instinct and insight, between habit and intention. Awareness exposes contradictions that were once invisible. It reveals costs that were once absorbed silently by land, by animals, by future generations not yet imagined. This is where humanity stands now, not at the end of a story, but at the point where the story begins to look back at itself. For most of our existence, humans lived inside the present. The past lived as memory, the future as preparation, but neither dominated the mind. Civilization reversed this balance. It turned the past into authority and the future into obsession. The present became merely a means to an end, something to be optimized, endured, or escaped. This temporal distortion reshaped human behavior profoundly. People began sacrificing present well-being for promised futures that never fully arrived. Generations worked so the next might live better, only for each generation to repeat the pattern. Progress became a horizon that moved faster than fulfillment. Satisfaction was always postponed. This is not accidental. Systems driven by growth depend on dissatisfaction. A content population does not consume endlessly. A fulfilled mind does not chase status compulsively. Restlessness became fuel. The pre-civilized world did not escape desire, but desire was bounded. You wanted what you could see, touch, and use. Civilization expanded desire beyond sensory limits. It taught people to want symbols, numbers, abstractions, wealth that existed only as agreement, success defined by comparison, value measured by accumulation. The psyche adapted again, but unevenly. Some embraced the chase, others felt alienated by it. Many lived suspended between gratitude and dissatisfaction, unable to reconcile comfort with emptiness. This tension is not personal failure, it is structural contradiction. When survival no longer demands attention, meaning demands explanation. The past before civilization did not need purpose as a concept. Purpose was embedded in survival, care, and continuity. Civilization turned purpose into a question and then into a commodity. People began searching for meaning the way they searched for tools, externally, efficiently, endlessly. But meaning does not behave like a tool. It emerges from alignment between action and values, between effort and outcome. When systems disrupt that alignment, meaning fractures. This is why periods of material abundance often coincide with spiritual unrest. The more disconnected daily life becomes from visible consequence, the harder it is for the psyche to feel grounded. The mind floats in abstraction while the body remains ancient, craving tangible participation in life. This mismatch produces a subtle grief. Not grief for something lost consciously, but grief for something unnamed. A sense that life is happening elsewhere. That time is slipping without being lived. That comfort has replaced fulfillment without consent. The world before civilization knew grief differently. Loss was visible, death was present, mourning was shared, ritual gave shape to sorrow. Grief moved through the community like weather, heavy but natural. Civilization often hides grief. It medicalizes it, privatizes it, rushes it. Productivity does not pause for mourning. Systems continue regardless of loss. This trains people to carry sorrow silently, accumulating weight without release. Unexpressed grief does not disappear. It transforms into anger, numbness, resentment, despair. Entire cultures can become grief-stricken without knowing why. Awareness brings this grief to the surface. To become conscious of our trajectory is to mourn what has already been lost, species erased, landscapes altered, ways of life extinguished. This mourning is not weakness, it is recognition, it is the psyche acknowledging reality. The danger lies not in grief, but in denial of it. Denial hardens hearts, it fuels defensiveness. It turns awareness into threat rather than invitation. When people feel accused rather than included, they retreat into identity, ideology, and blame. The past before civilization offers another path, collective processing. Early humans did not face loss alone. Ritual, story, and community allowed emotion to move through the group. This prevented stagnation. Pain transformed into wisdom rather than resentment. Modern civilization rarely offers such spaces at scale. This is why art becomes vital during periods of transition. Art bypasses argument, it speaks directly to the nervous system. It allows societies to feel what they cannot yet articulate. Music, storytelling, and symbol have always preceded cultural change, not because they explain it, but because they make it tolerable. We are living in an era rich with such signals, stories questioning progress, films imagining collapse, movements seeking reconnection. These are not signs of decay alone, they are signs of reckoning, of a species sensing that its old stories no longer fit its lived reality. Reckoning is uncomfortable but necessary. The world before civilization reminds us that discomfort is not failure. It is information. Hunger informs, pain warns, fear alerts. Ignoring these signals is dangerous. Listening to them is adaptive. Civilization has grown skilled at numbing discomfort rather than interpreting it, but numbing silence is guidance. To move forward consciously, humanity must relearn how to sit with unease without immediately escaping it, to ask what it is pointing toward. To distinguish between discomfort that signals growth and discomfort that signals harm. This discernment is rare but learnable. It begins with slowing down. Speed hides consequences. Slowness reveals patterns. Pre-civilized life was slow not because it lacked intelligence, but because slowness allowed attunement. You could not rush a season. You could not force a migration. You had to wait, watch, and respond. Civilization replaced waiting with planning, watching with measuring, responding with controlling. These tools brought power but also blindness. Reintroducing slowness is not regression, it is recalibration. Slowness creates space for reflection. Reflection allows awareness to integrate. Integration transforms insight into behavior. Without integration, awareness becomes anxiety. Many people today feel overwhelmed not because they know too little, but because they know too much without pathways for response. Information floods the mind faster than meaning can form. The psyche braces continuously, unable to resolve threat into action. This is not sustainable. The solution is not less knowledge, but deeper processing. The world before civilization processed knowledge through lived experience. We must find ways to do so again through education that connects theory to practice, through communities that act together rather than debate endlessly, through cultures that value wisdom as much as innovation. Innovation without wisdom accelerates error. Wisdom without innovation stagnates. The balance is delicate and dynamic. Humanity has never navigated this balance at planetary scale before. Mistakes are inevitable, but awareness allows for course correction if humility permits it. Humility is not self-denial, it is accuracy. It is knowing what you are capable of and what you are not. We are capable of extraordinary cooperation. We are not capable of infinite growth. We are capable of empathy. We are not capable of caring equally about abstractions beyond our emotional range without support structures. We are capable of creativity. We are not capable of ignoring ecological limits indefinitely. Accuracy about ourselves is the foundation of any sustainable future. The past before civilization did not theorize these truths, it lived them. Its knowledge was implicit, embodied, relational. Ours must become explicit, conscious, designed. This is the work of a self-aware species. Not to abandon its past, not to idolize it, but to translate its lessons into forms that can guide a complex, interconnected world. We are still early in this process. Awareness has arrived faster than integration. Insight has outpaced institution. The result is turbulence, but turbulence is not collapse, it is transition. And transitions are shaped not only by forces, but by choices, small, repeated human choices. Perspective widens slowly, like dawn rather than lightning. When humans first began to look back across time, not just generations, but millennia, they did not gain clarity immediately. They gained vertigo. The realization that we are a brief moment inside an ancient process is unsettling. It shrinks personal ambition while enlarging responsibility. It forces a reckoning between ego and continuity. Civilization has always struggled with this reckoning. On one hand, it magnifies the individual, names carved in stone, achievements recorded, legacies pursued. On the other, it erases individuals into systems so vast that no single life seems to matter. The tension between significance and insignificance pulses beneath every human story. The world before civilization resolved this tension differently. No one expected to be remembered forever. Memory lived in lineage, not in name. A person mattered because they contributed to continuity, by teaching, by caring, by maintaining balance. Death was final but not meaningless. What survived was not identity but impact. Civilization inverted this logic. Legacy became personal rather than collective. Memory became selective. Some were remembered excessively, most not at all. This distorted how people valued their lives. Being useful was replaced by being visible. Contribution was replaced by recognition. And with that shift, something fragile entered the human psyche, the fear of insignificance. This fear drives much of what civilization rewards: status, accumulation, domination, permanence. It is not greed alone. It is existential anxiety expressed through systems. People want to matter, and when meaning is not embedded in daily life, they seek it symbolically. The pre-civilized world did not eliminate this fear, but it grounded it. You mattered because your absence would be felt immediately. Your skills fed others, your care protected children, your knowledge guided survival. Meaning was not abstract, it was tangible. Modern civilization often severs this feedback. People work without seeing outcomes. They contribute to systems too large to comprehend. Their labor disappears into abstraction. When they ask whether they matter, the system has no answer, only metrics. Metrics do not satisfy the psyche. This is why awareness often brings discomfort before clarity. Once people see the scale of systems and their own smallness within them, they either numb themselves or search for deeper grounding. Some turn inward, some turn outward, some cling harder to identity, some dissolve it entirely. None of these responses are wrong. They are attempts to recalibrate meaning under new conditions, but recalibration requires more than reaction. It requires orientation. Orientation answers a simple but profound question: what am I part of? In the world before civilization, the answer was obvious. You were part of land, season, group, lineage. The boundaries were clear, the dependencies visible. Orientation came from environment itself. Civilization blurred these answers. You are part of an economy, a nation, a network, a market, a data stream. These are real, but they are intangible. They do not engage the senses the way land does. They do not respond with immediate feedback. Orientation becomes conceptual rather than experiential. This is cognitively impressive but emotionally destabilizing. Awareness exposes this gap. It shows that humans have built worlds their bodies cannot fully inhabit, that the map has grown larger than the terrain the nervous system evolved to navigate, that we live surrounded by symbols pointing to realities we rarely touch directly. This realization does not mean those worlds must be abandoned. It means they must be grounded. Grounding is not metaphorical, it is practical. It means reconnecting abstract systems to lived experience. It means shortening feedback loops where possible. It means designing work, communities, and technologies that allow people to see, feel, and understand the consequences of their actions. Without grounding, awareness becomes paralysis. With grounding, awareness becomes agency. Agency does not require total control. It requires meaningful influence, the ability to act and see response, to adjust and learn. To know that effort matters even if outcomes are imperfect. The world before civilization excelled at this. Actions mattered immediately. Learning was constant. Mistakes were costly but informative. Civilization diluted this learning through scale. When systems buffer consequences too effectively, learning slows. Errors accumulate unnoticed. Correction becomes dramatic rather than incremental. This is why collapses feel sudden even when they were long in the making. Awareness aims to restore incremental correction, not by dismantling systems overnight, but by reintroducing responsiveness. By creating structures that can feel stress before breaking, by valuing signals from the margins rather than silencing them. This requires cultural maturity. Maturity is not optimism or pessimism. It is realism paired with care. It is the ability to hold complexity without denial, to accept trade-offs without surrendering values, to act without certainty. The pre-civilized world lived this maturity unconsciously. It had no illusions of control. It responded to what was, not to what it wished were true. Modern civilization often reverses this order. It imagines futures first, then forces reality to comply. When reality resists, as it always does, frustration follows, blame follows, escalation follows. Awareness invites a different posture, listening before acting. Listening to data, yes, but also to lived experience, to communities, to ecosystems, to discomfort, to dissent. These are not obstacles to progress. They are navigational tools. The world before civilization did not ignore dissent because dissent often meant survival knowledge. A hunter who questioned a route might save lives. A gatherer who noticed change might prevent disaster. Civilization often treats dissent as inefficiency, but dissent is how systems learn. The challenge of awareness is that it reveals how much has been ignored. This can trigger defensiveness. No one likes to confront the possibility that comfort was purchased at hidden cost. That stability relied on exploitation. That progress was unevenly distributed. Yet facing this truth does not require guilt, it requires responsibility. Guilt focuses on the past. Responsibility focuses on the present. We cannot undo what has been done. We can decide what we reinforce next. The world before civilization reminds us that reinforcement shapes reality. Behaviors repeated become culture. Practices normalized become tradition. Choices multiplied become destiny. Destiny is not mystical, it is cumulative. This understanding strips away both fatalism and fantasy. It shows that the future is neither doomed nor guaranteed. It is responsive, responsive to values, responsive to incentives, responsive to awareness translated into practice. Awareness alone changes nothing. But awareness that informs design of systems, of norms, of priorities changes everything. This is where humanity's story becomes uniquely demanding. We can no longer claim ignorance. We can no longer pretend consequences are local. We can no longer assume time will correct what behavior reinforces. The world before civilization survived without foresight because its impact was limited. We must survive with foresight because our impact is total. This is not a curse. It is a threshold. Thresholds are uncomfortable places. Old maps fail. New ones are incomplete. Certainty dissolves before direction stabilizes. People argue not because they are foolish, but because orientation is contested. In such moments, returning to first principles matters. The first principle of the pre-civilized world was continuity of life, not comfort, not dominance, continuity. Everything else was subordinate to that. Customs, taboos, hierarchies, even beliefs existed to protect continuity. When they failed, they were altered or abandoned. Civilization often inverts this hierarchy, protecting systems even when they undermine continuity. Awareness challenges this inversion. It asks whether our systems still serve life or whether life is being asked to serve systems. It asks whether success metrics align with survival metrics. It asks whether the stories we tell still help us live or merely help us justify. These questions are unsettling because they destabilize certainty, but they are also liberating. They reopen possibility. Possibility does not mean utopia, it means choice, the ability to choose restraint over escalation, repair over replacement, care over indifference, depth over speed. These choices do not require unanimity, they require momentum. Momentum builds through example more than argument, through lived alternatives rather than abstract debate, through communities that model alignment rather than preach it. The world before civilization did not persuade people with ideology, it persuaded them with survival. Modern civilization must persuade itself with coherence. When systems make sense to the psyche, compliance feels natural. When they do not, enforcement increases and trust erodes. Trust is the invisible infrastructure of any society. Without it, complexity collapses under its own weight. Trust cannot be commanded. It emerges from consistency between words and actions, between values and outcomes. This consistency is what awareness seeks to restore, not perfection, consistency. As this part of the story unfolds, nothing dramatic resolves. There is no climax yet, only convergence. Ancient instincts converge with modern insight. Personal unease converges with collective awareness. The memory of what we were converges with the question of what we will become. This convergence is the quiet center of the narrative. It is not loud, it does not trend easily, but it is powerful, because once a species becomes aware not only of its power but of its patterns, it stands at a rare point in evolutionary history. Not at the end, but at a pause, and pauses, though brief, are where direction is chosen. There comes a moment in every long story when all the threads pull tight at once, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with clarity. This is that moment. From a lifeless planet wrapped in fire, to oceans that learned chemistry, to single cells that learned cooperation, to creatures that learned movement, fear, and memory, everything has been building toward awareness. Not intelligence alone, not power, awareness of consequence. No other species has ever stood where humanity stands now. Life has reshaped Earth many times before. Oxygen transformed the atmosphere. Forests changed climate. Microbes altered oceans. But none of these forces knew what they were doing. They did not pause, they did not reflect, they did not ask whether they should continue. We can, that is the difference, that is the burden, that is the opportunity. The world before civilization was not conscious of itself. It did not need to be. Its impact was limited by scale. Its mistakes were local. Its corrections were swift. Life stayed inside feedback loops it could feel. Civilization broke those loops. We stretched influence across continents. We delayed consequences across generations. We learned how to act without immediately seeing results. This gave us power, but it also removed friction. And friction is how life learns. Now awareness is reintroducing friction, psychological, moral, existential. We feel it as anxiety, as grief, as confusion, as polarization, as a sense that something is wrong even when things appear functional. This is not collapse yet. This is recognition. Recognition that we are no longer just living in history. We are shaping the conditions under which history itself will continue. Every previous era could imagine a future beyond itself. Ours must imagine whether there will be one that resembles anything we recognize as human. This does not mean catastrophe is inevitable. It means responsibility is unavoidable, and responsibility changes how stories end. The past before civilization teaches us something humbling. Life does not reward dominance forever. It rewards fit with environment. Fit with limits, fit with reality. Civilizations fail when they mistake power for fit. Fit requires listening. Fit requires restraint. Fit requires adaptation before crisis forces it. The quiet truth is that humanity already knows much of what needs to change. The knowledge exists, the data exists, the warnings are clear, the alternatives are emerging. What delays action is not ignorance, it is identity. We are attached to stories about who we are, about success, about progress, about growth, about what it means to live a good life. Letting go of those stories feels like losing ourselves, but identity has always evolved. The humans who first controlled fire were not less human than those who painted caves. The farmers were not less human than the hunter-gatherers. The city builders were not less human than the nomads. Each transformation felt like loss to those living through it, and yet humanity continued. The final question is not whether civilization will change, it already is. The question is how consciously. Unconscious change looks like collapse, conflict, and reaction. Conscious change looks like redesign, restraint, and renewal. Neither path is painless, but one preserves agency. The world before civilization reminds us that survival was never about comfort. It was about relationship between humans, between species, between present and future. Civilization forgot this temporarily. Awareness is bringing it back, not as a return to the past, but as integration. A civilization that remembers it is biological, a technology that respects ecology, an economy that understands regeneration, a culture that values belonging as much as achievement, a future that does not demand everything now at the cost of everything later. This is not idealism, it is alignment, and alignment is how life endures. One day, far in the future, people will look back at this era. They will not ask how advanced our devices were. They will not ask how fast our systems ran. They will not ask how much we consumed. They will ask one thing: did they understand what they were part of, and did they act accordingly? We cannot control the answer completely, but we influence it every day, through what we normalize, through what we tolerate, through what we protect, through what we pass on. We are all ancestors now, not someday. Now, and the most powerful inheritance is not technology, it is direction. The world before civilization carried humanity this far without awareness. The world after this moment will depend on what we do with awareness. That is where this story truly ends and where the next one begins. If this narration made you think, if it unsettled you, if it gave you perspective, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Comment with your thoughts, what resonated most or what challenged you. And tell us where you're watching from, because this story belongs to all of us everywhere. We continue together.